I've been asked many questions about my life, and I've decided now is a fitting time to answer them. I'll start from the beginning. What was your early life like? I was born May 2nd, 1729, in the seaport town of Stettin. The name I was born with was Princess Sophia August Frederica. My father was Prince Christian August, and my mother was Princess Johanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp. How did you become involved with Russia? Elizabeth I of Russia was looking for a fiancé for her nephew, and the future heir to the throne, Peter III. I was the perfect age, and so in 1743, my mother and I were brought to Russia, and in February 9, 1744, I met Elizabeth in Moscow. Were there any other motives behind your engagement to Peter besides his needs for a wife? Yes, my potential match to the heir to the throne was promoted by my mother and King Frederick of Prussia, who saw the alliance as a way to further Prussian interest in the court at St. Petersburg. He said he saw greatness in me, even as a child. What did you have to do in order to marry Peter? I had to convert from my Lutheran faith to the Russian Orthodox Church, being rechristened as Yekaterina, or Catherine. My heart boded no good. I was sustained by ambition alone. There was something within me that never allowed me to doubt for a single moment that I would one day succeed in becoming Tsarina of Russia, in my own right. What was it that Elizabeth wanted from you? She really wanted Peter and I to have a child, so that our line would secure the throne. But Peter was not able to consummate the marriage for 8 years, and so Elizabeth permitted an affair between me and a handsome Russian officer, Sergei Saltykov. We had a son, Paul, who Peter claimed as his own. Immediately after his birth, little Paul was carried off to Elizabeth's quarters, and the Empress raised him as her own. How did you and Peter feel about each other? We were actually cousins, which at the time, there was no taboo on such a thing. We hated each other bitterly. He was an uneducated lout, and all he was interested in was riding his Prussian horses and playing with his toy soldiers. In the beginning, I was kind to him and gained his trust. He confided in me. He told me that he had no interest in becoming Tsar of such a miserable country. After a bout with smallpox, he became quite horrid to look at. The smallpox also attacked his brain, making him even more emotionally unstable. What about your child, Paul? It was a struggle to become pregnant, because my husband, for 8 years, could not consummate the marriage. But then, in the summer of 1752, I became lovers with Sergei Saltykov. I soon became pregnant, but miscarried twice. Then, on September 20th, 1754, I gave birth to my son Paul. Soon after his birth, he was taken to Tsarina Elizabeth to be raised as her own. After giving birth to Paul, what happened? I was ignored by my husband, the Tsarina, and most of the Russian court. I turned to books and resumed my study of European history and politics. I felt alone and abandoned, but I persevered. Nothing was going to stop me from becoming Tsarina of Russia. What happened as Tsarina Elizabeth's health deteriorated? Her years of overeating and drinking were finally catching up with her, but every time she seemed close to death, she would miraculously bounce back. There were rumors that said Elizabeth would make my son Paul her heir to the throne. This would eliminate Peter from the line of succession. In December 1757, I had a daughter named Anna. Again, she was immediately taken away from me. Tell us about your husband, Peter. Hatred of Peter grew quickly among all classes, especially with the army. As Europe was entering its 3rd year at war, Prussia was sustaining heavy losses. Even though Elizabeth was very ill, she still voted to continue the fight. It was openly known that Peter was doing everything he could to help Frederick II, including passing on all information he could gather from his spies in the Russian officer corps. I now openly disapproved of my husband's actions. Tell me about you and Gregory Orlov. He and his brothers were immensely popular, and when I began an affair with Gregory, it only helped to cement my support within the Russian army. What did you have planned as Elizabeth's death approached? I knew that Peter planned to divorce me, declare Paul illegitimate, and assume the throne with his mistress. So, when his tutor Nikita Panin approached to discuss the chaos that might ensue following Elizabeth's death, I listened. Peter did not seem aware that people at court were talking about his lack of intellect, his drunkenness, and most of all, his support of Prussia and his disdain for the Russian Orthodox Church, that it would be both necessary and easy to get rid of Peter and set up a regency for Paul. I pretended to consider his plan, but I had no intention of giving power to my son when he reached maturity. What happened after Elizabeth's death? Elizabeth died Christmas Day, 1761. The day after her death, Tsar Peter III assumed the throne of Russia. He had his mistress proudly at his side. I was working feverishly to hide a pregnancy that I knew could get me in deep trouble. What went on at her funeral? Despite the fact that I was 6 months pregnant, I knelt at the foot of Elizabeth's coffin the entire time. This display of modesty and humility gained me respect and admiration of my people. On the other hand, Peter appeared only a few times, and when he did, he ridiculed the priest, flirted with the ladies, and played the clown. He laughed at the idea of mourning for the dead Tsarina. His behaviors disgusted the court and the people. What happened when Peter III took the throne? He greatly admired Prussia, and when he took the throne, he forced the proud imperial guard to discard their uniforms under Peter the Great and start wearing the Prussian uniforms. They were tight-fitting and hated by the guard. He quickly made peace with Prussia, which angered the patriotic Russians. He declared publicly that Paul was not his son, and he planned to divorce me and marry his mistress. He turned Elizabeth's private chapel into a Lutheran church and banished me to a far corner of the palace. As my pregnancy reached full term, I had servants still loyal to me help me give the baby in secret. What happened at the banquet, and what were the results of it? At the banquet, Peter stood and proposed a toast to the royal family. I remained seated. Furious, Peter demanded to know why I did not stand. I told him that it was not proper for me to stand when the toast was being given in my honor. In a fit of rage, Peter shouted down the length of the table that I was an idiot. The guests were stunned. 4 days later, he ordered for my arrest. But his advisors were able to talk him out of it. Now, his intentions were clear. If I was going to survive, I had to act soon. What did you do to Peter? I began to form a plan. The Orlov brothers worked in recruiting officers and hoped to have an army of 10,000 soldiers ready to fight on my behalf. I spent 5 days in St. Petersburg, arranging my plans. I went to France and England for support. England was more willing to openly back me than France. In the middle of the night, I was awoken and told it was time. I marched on St. Petersburg and then was crowned Tsarina of Russia. I was still afraid Peter may come and try to make his claim to the throne, but instead he fled. The next morning I received a letter stating that he acknowledged his cruelty to me and would share the throne. I laughed. I made for him to be confined to his estate outside St. Petersburg. On June 30th, 1762, I marched into St. Petersburg and secured the throne. Unfortunately, Peter was killed while under guard by Alexis Orlov. When were you coronated? I was coronated Tsarina Catherine II on September 22nd, 1762. What were some of your first acts as Tsarina? After reading some books from Enlightenment philosophers, what were some of your first acts as Tsarina? I tried to improve the working conditions for miners and industrial factory workers, but many of the local governors refused to work with me. At my first meeting with the Senate, I was informed that soldiers had not been paid in months. The budget was a mess, Russia was deeply in debt, and that there were numerous peasant rebellions going on all over the countryside. I quickly ordered a full report on everything I was aware of, and sent people to record and observe things that I was not. What about the country's money problem? Russia had a unique monetary system. The money was not backed by gold, silver, or any other commodity, but only the word of the reigning sovereign. This meant that I could order more money be printed without causing inflation. On top of that, I declared I would no longer accept my personal allowances granted to every Russian ruler. This saved almost a tenth of the country's total annual budget. Tell us about the war with Turkey. Our control of Poland made much of Europe very nervous, but the Turks were especially threatened. They shared a border with Poland and began providing support for the rebel Poles. Turkey soon declared war. I was delighted at the idea because Turkey controlled one region I wanted very badly. I wanted this one because of its warm water port. This would allow trade year-round. The ultimate goal was to recapture the city of Constantinople, the spiritual home of the Orthodox Church. It went well in the beginning, with the Russian Navy destroying Turkish fleets in the Aegean Seas. But then the Russian momentum slowed and the war became nothing but intermittent skirmishes with little gain for either side. The rest of Europe decided not to oppose me on the battlefield, but the French and even my ally Joseph II feared that if Russia defeated the Turks, there would be nothing stopping me from turning west and taking the rest of Europe. I arranged a secret conference with Frederick II of Prussia and Joseph II of Austria in return for their cooperation with the invasion of Poland. I rewarded them both generous piece of land in Poland. By July 1774, I arranged a secret conference with Frederick II of Prussia and Joseph II of Austria. In return for their cooperation with the invasion of Poland, I rewarded both of them with generous slices of the country. By 1774, Russia had finally achieved a clear-cut victory over the Turks. The Black Sea was now open to Russian commerce. A year later, Russia and Turks signed a treaty. The agreement extended the Russian Empire to the northern shores of the Black Sea. Later in 1787, the Turks again declared war on Russia. England and Prussia sided with Turkey, France declared itself neutral, and Joseph II decided that Austria would fight with me. Soon the Swedes joined the fight and attacked Russia. But abruptly in 1790, the Russians and the Swedes signed a treaty. After the death of one of my favorite advisors, I insisted on an immediate peace treaty with Turkey. What do you have to say about the Serf Rebellion? A man by the name of Emelian Pugachev began telling people that he was Peter III brought back to free them. He swiftly moved across the remote countryside, gathering followers in his wake. But by the time they reached the Volga River, their numbers ranged over 15,000 and growing. In July, he and his followers stormed Kazan, where the newly emerging Industrial Revolution had begun. Regular army forces defeated the serfs, but only temporarily. It annoyed me greatly that this man was claiming to be my late husband. He had been vocally anti-Russian, and now this maniac was using him as inspiration. September 1774, Pugachev was captured. He was tried and found guilty of treason. He was beheaded, and his head was displayed on a pole in Moscow. His accomplices were tortured and killed. After this, I became a vocal advocate of the oppressive class system. How did your rule affect Russia? I took an isolated country and opened it up to European influences, while at the same time promoting a uniquely Russian culture. I did my best to reform and codify the bizarre and archaic Russian legal system. I was tolerant of many religions and was very open to the idea of a secular state. I accomplished more in my time than most leaders can say, and I loved Russia more than anything else in my life. I wished for my grandson Alexander to take the throne, but I died on November 24th, 1796. Before I could make it official, my son Paul claimed the throne, and this brought an end to my reign as Catherine the Great of Russia.